Welcome to The Truth in This Art, your source for conversations at the intersection of arts, culture, and community. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today I am thrilled to welcome my next guest. She is the co-founder of Culture House, a Black and brown woman-owned media company reshaping the way race, gender, and identity are portrayed in media. Please welcome Carri Twigg. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for making the time. I'm jealous of the volume to the hair. The hair is like it's doing its thing. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you saying that. I'm relieved, even though this clip might go on the internet, I'm relieved this isn't a video podcast, generally speaking. But the top knot is always the sign of a woman at work. You know what I mean?
I dig it. I have not gone to the barbershop in 3 weeks. This is why I have a hat on. I'm balding, but I have the hat on to cover up the stubble. So also, right. I'm appreciative this is not a video podcast. So before we go into like sort of the major topics of today's conversation, I which is a custom for me, I like to give my guests the space and the opportunity to, just introduce themselves. I think a lot of times we get these bios, right? We get these CVs, these artist statements, all of these different things. And somehow a detail is left out, something essential to who the person is. So I want to give you the space to introduce yourself in your own words and, share something that usually doesn't pop up in your bios.
Oh man, the core truth of who I am. So I'm Carri Twigg. I live in Los Angeles, California, but I'm born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. I run a film, TV, and live immersive experiences company called Culture House that I founded with two other women in 2018. I sort of think about myself as someone who does a lot of work at the intersection of pop culture and politics. I had a 12-year career in politics before I got into cultural work. I write a lot. I am both on sort of Substack, on culture, on politics, for our shows and the things that we make at Culture House. I am the baby of the family, and it shows up pretty often in my behavior. My family is from Barbados on my father's side. My mother's side sort of like founded Ohio and has been in America for a very long time. And I love to read, and I love to garden, and I love to cook.
Okay, and you see, this is what happens when I let folks cook, right? So let them say their thing. It's just giving me more fuel for the rapid fire. So you might see me typing as we go along. It's like, yeah, so back to cooking, right? So you know how you said that like an hour ago? Let's dive into that a little bit. And thank you for that. And also the youngest child, the baby thing. That's interesting. I'm like a retroactive middle child, and I'm told that that's literally what it is. I learned that I had two older siblings that I didn't grow up with. So I went from being oldest to middle, then somewhere in the middle when we found, I had another brother. So, yeah.
I love a surprise sibling. I've had one of those myself.
It's pretty good. Yeah. Just looking for my role.
Yeah.
So storytelling, culture, representation, that's what I'm kind of hearing with your working description, and just sort of obviously the politics piece in there as well. You're saying 12 years. For those who aren't familiar and who don't get it, you were touching on it, but could you describe like sort of the, like what you do at this point? I know that the media thing with Culture House, that's a really big thing, but in terms of like impact, could you talk about that a bit?
Sure. I mean, we really focus on making long form TV shows. We make some film, some short film, mostly feature length documentary. But so we made a show called Ladies First, a story of women in hip hop. That's about sort of not only the origin story of hip hop through the perspective of women, but also the ways the societal forces that have sought to control, to diminish, to shape that experience, right? The ways that we set up economies based on scarcity for women in a way that we don't for our male counterparts, the way that we erase the contributions and the genius of Black women and Black girls in a way that we don't for their male counterparts. And so, but with all the sort of style and fly and vibe of hip hop, right? We made a show called Black Twitter that was out on Hulu this spring.
Yeah.
And that's a show about like all the jokes, right, on Black Twitter, but it's really about how Black people interact with digital spaces, how we innovate digital spaces, but also how digital spaces of today that Black people congregate in and on are an extension of what we've always done, whether it was drum circles or the Pullman Porters. Like we have always found each other and shared information, shared culture, shared jokes, shared story. And Black Twitter was just the latest iteration of that, right? It was a place where we went, it was the digital way that we went and got our cousins when some shit went down, or when we wanted to get our jokes off, or to play the dozens or whatever. And so that is a show, yes, about a moment in time and particular digital iconography, but it's really also a discussion about how Black people move ideas through culture.
Yeah.
And so that is what we do at Culture House. We make television film that's about sort of a broader cultural reality and give it its political context, and sort of use entertainment as a way to further or contextualize a conversation that we think has resonance and value and importance to an audience.
Thank you. And we're going to go back into Culture House a little bit more, obviously, but I want to know, and I just love sort of the breakdown. It had me thinking of all new questions to start asking, and then we'll just be here for 3 hours. We can't have that.
Joe Rogan.
So what was the sort of moment that set you on this path in your career? Like, as far as, parlaying from the politics background to like media and that being sort of the focus. And, I'll preface that with sort of, I gave you a little bit before we got started of sort of the genesis of doing this. It was out of tightness, but I've also been a podcaster for like 16 years. And I felt like, having this background was a way to try to tell and shape and share these stories and archive sort of the stories of this community. But what was the moment that sort of set you on this path creatively and from a career standpoint?
It wasn't a moment, it was a series of moments. It was this experience I had when I was working at the White House, and sort of no matter where I went around the country, or to be frank, around the world, with the president or the vice president or on my own, when I would tell people that I worked at the White House, they could not, or often would not be able to repeat back with much accuracy what we were doing, what we were about, what we stood for, the fights we'd lost and how we'd lost them, right? So there were people who were like, oh, you haven't done anything for Black people. And it's like, what are you talking about? We've done this, and this. Or you did this and it was really, I'm against it. And it's like, we didn't do that. Why do you think we did that? And so there was just this massive gap over often 90% of the times that I would interact with anyone outside of DC, they either had no idea what they were talking about, or they thought something that was true wasn't, or vice versa. And it was this realization that everyone in America can name every Kardashian. Like everyone knows who won the Super Bowl. Everyone knows who Taylor Swift is dating, or whatever the example was. And yet people don't know what the president is doing.
Right.
Like what on earth, And so it was just this dawning realization that I think not just me, but so many people in the Obama era had, that our civic life and our cultural life are just too far apart. Like there isn't enough overlap in that Venn diagram. Yeah. And so I think it's not a coincidence that you saw so many people, including the Obamas, go into storytelling after their White House era.
Yeah. So, and I see that there is that connection between like, politics and storytelling and that sort of shape on society. We're recording this a few weeks after the most recent election. And you mentioned a name that in the podcast circles, there's been some sort of tightness around sort of that level of impact and how those endorsements work, or even, one of the other things you touched on, as far as like just folks not being aware of what's actually happening, what the president is doing and so on. And I find like, as I watch podcasts, listen to podcasts and watch like clips, just folks are just kind of spouting stuff, and it just turns into a snowball of almost misinformation. And the sort of lack of responsibility is there at times. And not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I think there is an impact on sort of the stories that are told and the narratives that are put out there and where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. The more I do this work, the more I realize that basically any human endeavor is a storytelling exercise. Politics is a storytelling exercise. We think of it mostly as only in a very specific like narrative context, but everything we do is telling a story about who we are, what we value, or what we believe. And we've allowed in America so many, like you go to Europe and that you watch the news, it's totally different. Like it's
Yeah.
just different, right? The cultural values allow for different types of regulation around who can say what and in what spaces, around what these platforms are able to do and say and distribute. And there's pluses and minuses to that I'm happy to like debate with people. I suppose I'm actually never happy to debate with people, but that I'm willing to accept a range of opinions as perfectly and equally valid. But the reality is that we have a particular story that we tell in America about this sort of rugged individualism and the kind of downstream consequences of allowing everyone to figure it out for themselves means that there are very few safeguards or guardrails for people to figure out what's actually happening in the world around them.
Yeah, even in this space, like, I shared a little bit and I've talked about it on several podcasts at this point of going into the education space and teaching like the next generations of podcasters. And I don't get questions on mic technique, on storytelling. I get questions on how do you monetize this? I was like,
Yeah.
do you have a podcast? Do you actually have an opinion or something that's new? And I use this adage or this example. I'm like, a couple years ago, everyone did an entanglement podcast. They're not good. Don't do that. Do something original. Have your own take.
What are entanglement podcasts?
The Jada Pinkett, Will Smith, I was entangled with. Everyone had the same take, and it was nothing original or interesting about it, but it was sort of this idea that this is what's selling. This is what is getting engagement on social media. So we all should have to have something to say on this topic.
Got it.
And that's sort of the thing. It's just do something original, and especially with like sort of like news stories and things of that nature. It's just like this story is still developing. You're not a journalist or whatever the thing
Yeah.
would be.
There's been this weird, I mean, human beings, it's like the internet's a great idea, just not for humans. It's just like not, it's like not good for us, to be perfectly honest. I mean, brilliant, but just not, it's not for us. The fact that the fact that like the average human being is like, because I can share an opinion on something automatically means that opinion then has merit is really amazing. It's like, because there's now this platform where I can share all of my thoughts, that endows all of my thoughts with value.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we think like it's just this incredible cycle that is just absolutely terrible for human beings. It makes us all like wildly miscalibrated to the world around us and to like reality. But here we are.
Yes, and before I move into this next question, I'll say this sort of last thing. I've seen it making the rounds recently. The clip from a old Dave Chappelle special of like, what does Ja Rule think? It's like I don't care. I don't care what Ja Rule thinks about this political thing or whatever the story is. And even this other notion of just that sort of different sense of reality of folks not, actually talking to individuals. We have a harder time doing that with social media, but we can talk to chat and just throw it out there into the ether. And, it's nothing. I don't know if it's healthy. I'll just put it that way.
I don't think it is healthy. I mean, I think it's kind of almost unassailable that it's not healthy. Yeah, I mean, but this is another one of like our great human fragilities or failures is that we think that because something that makes someone really talented in one respect means that they're uniformly talented across the board. Like this pedestaling that we do, like you're a good rapper and you had some bops in the early aughts, Ja Rule, therefore I should care about what you have to say about literally anything else.
Yeah.
is is incredible, right? The way that we over and over, I don't know how many times we've been burned by the fact that like someone's a really great performer and then therefore that we are shocked when we find out they're not great people. It's like this idea that because you are brilliant or great or exceptional genius at one thing means you can do other stuff well has been proven false over and over and over and over and over again. And it's often true about us as individuals. Like every individual has this one thing that they're probably really, really good at, and then a bunch of things that they're terrible at.
Right.
And yet we fall into this trap of like who cares about Kanye West's political opinions? Like he doesn't know anything about, like, who cares?
Right.
And yet because he's a musical genius, which is like not for me to even judge, I'm not even qualified to make that assertion, but because I'm told he's a musical genius, it's like, then we're supposed to care what he says about literally anything outside of music. Like, why?
Right. Or, we factor in like, oh, you have this much influence, you have millions of followers. Yeah, that's kind of dangerous and it's kind of weird.
But that's on the followers' fault. Like, you can't blame people. Again, everyone has the same thing. It's people who are like, listen to what he says about music. Don't listen to anything else. You don't need to buy his shoes. Those things are hideous. Like, sorry, but might be a spicy take, but Yeezys are hideous.
They are.
But like, that's on the followers' fault. I don't even blame the artist for that. They can't help it if people like them listen to what they have to say. That's on them. That's on y'all.
And I'll comment on the sort of Trump thing, since that's sort of, as I shared earlier, where this kind of started. I just remember, I did a different podcast before starting this, and we would pay attention to politics or what have you, and just have like sort of, just our takes on it or what have you, just being engaged in that way and following it. And I just remember my buddy and my co-host at the time, we were talking about it, and I was like, that dude's qualified? I was like, how? And it was literally that. And we were having sort of this debate on this actor. They had an opinion around politics. And it's like, well, this person shouldn't have an opinion. I was like, yeah, but someone with maybe less credibility who's a reality TV person is able to run for the office? I was like, what are we doing here? And this podcast is run concurrently.
Fame was already a bad idea, and then we added the internet. It's just a disaster.
Yes. So I want to shift, because this will end up going into a whole different sphere where I'm barely able to jab with your background. And you said you read books, so that's another thing. But so background media, politics, it's, I think, has a how has it shaped your approach to storytelling, and sort of with that foundation in storytelling and politics, and sort of, could you share the genesis and the creation of Culture House? Like, what was that story? What inspired the creation? And sort of, you've touched on the mission. What was that story around the creation of Culture House?
Yeah. So there's a couple different questions in that, I think. And one I would love to get into, I think we generally underestimate what a science storytelling is, but we can go into that in a minute. The origin story of Culture House is that I was working at the White House. I wanted to figure out how things got on television once I left the White House. And so when I left the White House, it was like the spring of 2016. It was before Donald Trump was president. I was pretty sure, I had this like very loose thesis that we were underestimating the power of television to determine political outcomes, sort of as a whole. Yeah. 6 months later, I was proven right when we elected a television star president. But I moved to New York and started consulting for a bunch of different media companies, including like a bunch of Viacom brands, and was working with Refinery 29 on something. And then through that process, met my now business partner, was set up on a friend date. Actually, someone was just like, hey, like, you're new in New York. You should really meet Resham. She's a legend. I think you guys would hit it off. We meet for a drink or something. And we did hit it off. And she's amazing. And 7 years later, we have a business.
Wow. That's really cool.
Pretty much that simple. The very first time we met, we came up with the idea that we later sold to Netflix as our women in hip hop documentary, Ladies First.
Wow. So getting out of, sort of that 2016, then sort of the friend dating, connecting in that and being able to just come to like this is, I guess, is where you're at times and having the background.
Say that again.
I guess it's being where you're at, like you were in New York or what have you, and having that sort of being there in that community. You're new there in New York, and you're able to get connected to your business partner, your creative partner here. That sounds like really cool. It almost sounds like, that's the way that these things should work.
But I think that's often the way that they do if you're open, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's like I didn't meet her. I think if I'd been going around trying to meet a business partner, I'm sure I would have met somebody, but Ray and Nicole, the third woman who started the company with us, like I feel extraordinarily blessed. I have the best business partners in the world. I wouldn't have found them if I were looking for them, right? But I think I was just open and was looking for people who I thought were interesting and intellectually like on the same wavelength, so on and so forth. And so you end up finding someone that you can build a relationship with. And then we didn't start the business that day, right? We came up with this idea that we would continue to talk about over the course of months and months. But I think that's often how it goes, like people are put into your path. And if you're curious and you're open and you're willing to share and you're willing to sort of engage,
Yeah.
then the opportunities to build things are ample.
That's great. That's great. It's inspirational in that way where, curiosity, like being drawn by it, because it is this thing that I encounter. I know that a lot of folks encounter sort of I think you touched on it earlier, the rugged individualism, like, oh, you should be anointed to have this. But, you kind of connect with folks, however you get there, but you connect with folks, you have similar interests, curiosities, and then you're able to kind of build something really cool, really unique that you all feel that this hits, this is representative of what we could do, what we may want to do.
Yeah, I think we have a bad habit in society of being really outcome oriented. And so I see that in creative work a lot, but I even see it in life. It's like people go on a date and it's like, could I marry this person? It's like, girl, the point of going on a date with someone is to know if you want to go on a second date. Like and it's the same thing of collaborators. It's like, do I find you interesting? Am I still thinking about something you said or introduced me to days after we met? Like, do I want to talk to you again? Right. And I think so often we are taught to focus on, or we're not only just taught, but we're sort of trained. I think Instagram does this. Social media just shows us the end result of often years, if not, months, weeks, but often years of work and collaboration and thinking and iteration, right?
Yeah.
People don't put their drafts up, but there's draft upon draft upon draft upon draft and failure upon failure upon failure. And all of that gets you to this end point. But if you think that the beginning is supposed to look like the end, you won't actually even get started, right? And so letting in a little room for mystery and curiosity, I think, is one of the most important things as people are trying to figure out how to navigate their life, their friends, a new city, a new project, a new business, like all of everything.
Yeah, I hear it all the time. It's about sort of those reps and being in love with sort of being curious about the process, not just, well, I need to let's say if I have a goal of doing 100 interviews in a year, all right, we're at 100 now. This was success, and defining it by these sort of rigid ideas versus, hey, I'm at episode 51. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed. I'm really into it, and I'm enjoying doing this. And episode 52, I kind of sucked. I wasn't great, but I learned from it. I was able to be better at 53 and so on. It's those sort of reps. It's the wins, the challenging parts and so on that makes up that sort of full body of work, that full body of time, I suppose.
Totally.
So for you, could you speak on like, a challenge that comes to mind? You think about sort of the work with Culture House, like just something that sticks out as like, this was tough. This was a really challenging project, or just period within, the sort of trajectory of Culture House.
Oh my God, talk about being here for hours. The whole damn thing has been hell. It's been amazing. Don't get me wrong. I love it. I'm happy I'm doing it. I'm pretty sure I would do it again given the chance. But like it's running a business is hard. It is awful. And film and TV is in the middle of this like total restructuring, right? You had the historic double writer or the writer strike. You had the pandemic where you couldn't shoot anything in person. You had the Netflix Wall Street correction. You've had flattening budgets. You've had never had more competition to get people to watch your thing, which is directly tied to your compensation, your ability to make work again. There's the fact that by nature, because these projects are so expensive, you basically have to ask permission to make your work. At the scale that we're doing it, right? We have to get the permission of our distributor to make things. Yes, you can make things independently. I encourage everyone to do that as best as you possibly can. Everyone has a camera in their pocket. And if you want to be a filmmaker, like you can make as many films as you want. However, to get something on Netflix, you have to go and ask Netflix if you can make it. And they can say yes or no. And like that in its own right is extraordinarily challenging. The algorithms, the way that we are moving towards a cultural landscape where the things that have worked in the past are prioritized over the things that might work and innovation in the future. The flattening out of taste, right? And preferences, the fact that every coffee shop looks the same. That's like the standard of beauty is actually narrowing instead of widening. It's really difficult. So I mean, shall I go on?
Oh, no. That's great, 'cause especially with some of the stuff that I've been reading. I've been rereading The Death of the Artist, and that's covered in it. Sort of those ideas, the algorithms, how our tastes are. Oh, this is what you want. It's just kind of the same thing. A hit's a hit. Or even going a little bit further back, as remembers one book, I'm blanking on the name, but is this concept and design, the whole Maya concept, most advanced yet acceptable, what have you. And it's like, this is slightly different, but it's kind of the same thing. This always works. And you're pointing around coffee shops. I spent a lot of time in coffee shops, and it's like, this is the same. And I think that's what I was trying to get over with the point around the Entanglement podcast. It's just like, well, this is a formula that's acceptable. Let's just do our own version of it. And while maybe that's fine or what have you, but what's pushing the canon, which is leading to discourse, and granted, money and the attention economy, as I've been, hearing more and more about, is, how do you hook someone? How do you get someone, and how do you get something that you can get funding, or even, you can get a grant or something that's sort of in the other scale of things, like that's impacting how people are making work and some of the considerations that they, take into account. So with that in mind, what is like maybe a criteria, if you will, that you use for stories maybe now, that it's like all of it past a certain parameter of like, I think this is an interesting story, but with those considerations of, hey, Netflix, we want to make this. What sort of other considerations maybe you're making, now as, within Culture House, that it may have been a little different, let's say a couple years ago, as far as like, this has to definitely be a win in this way. This has to make this much, or this has the potential to make this much money, or whatever it may be.
I've never really worked like that, for better or
Okay.
for worse. I mean, I'd probably have a more successful business if I did. But I am really reluctant to kind of cater to taste in that way. Like, I only want to make things that I find interesting. And the reality is, making a TV show takes years. And so if I'm not going to be interested enough to talk about it basically every day for 2.5, 3 years, and I can't do it because I don't want to do work that I don't like. And so finding something that is interesting enough and then making the case that it is a worthy project, that it's clear, that the vision is articulated in a way that makes sense, that visually it'll be compelling and engaging and inspiring, and that will take you on a journey, that you'll be a different version of yourself on the other side of it. Like, making sure that you make good on all of those promises that actually capture attention and that live up to the ideals of what entertainment is supposed to be, like making sure something meets that criteria, as well as that it suits something that's something I want to put my name on, that it's something that I want to spend the one thing I can't get back time on, Because if I only did what I knew would sell,
Sure.
all I'd be making is shows about dead white girls, like murdered white girls. But it's true. I'd be making a murdered white girl television show factory. Like it'd be awful. And like that sounds like hell.
That's wow. That's a good point. It's a good point. I've run into it in doing this, like, oh, you should talk to these sorts of folks when I'm out there with the figurative, like, hat in hand. Maybe it's this hat. I don't know. But like, do you have a check, sir, to, help me fund this next season? And it's weird. It's weird, sort of the notes and the pitches that come back. And similarly to this sort of scale, I'm like, I'm not really interested in that, or that doesn't appeal to me, or that doesn't match my taste. And it's hard to be enthusiastic about it, as you were touching on, being able to talk about, a particular thing that you're interested in working on for a certain period of time. Like when I talk to someone about doing this, it's not TV, but it's sort of my thing. I can't fake the excitement, like
Totally.
when I was chatting around, I was like, yo, guess who I'm interviewing today? And they're like, why are you smiling so much? I was like, because I'm going to do moderate.
Yeah.
No, like I'm looking forward to it. And I say it all the time. You can't fake enthusiasm, you can't fake curiosity. And when some of these pitches come over, we have a PR person or we have this great opportunity. There have been instances where I'm like, I don't know. Sure, that money sounds great or the opportunity sounds great in theory, but I don't know if it fits what I'm doing. Or I'm probably not the right person for it because I'm not really into it. And I've had conversations with folks who will tell me that I'm bugging for turning down opportunities and money because the thing doesn't interest me. Oh, just fake it.
Listen, I'm not saying they're wrong. They're probably right. Take the cash. I don't know what to tell you, but like for me personally, I like it just won't. That's just not what I want to do. I don't know that it's the right thing.
No, I think we're on the same page here as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a real bummer, but I mean, I wish I could just do whatever it took for cash, but I'm just not, I don't have it in me, unfortunately, despite trying.
So I read and so I got two more sort of like real questions for you.
Yeah, what you got?
And I have one that came up. I've read about cultural consultancy. Could you take
Uh-huh.
us through what that is and why it's so important?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously gone away since we've elected Trump president again, but it used to be that people who were going to put things on television and big screens cared whether or not they were racist or sexist. Before the DE and I backlash. So there's less of that now. Obviously, being canceled is no longer a thing. So do what you want, be president.
I remember it was a Hulu show that I think had it was a plot point in it. I think it was the other black girl. And it was
Uh-huh.
just like this publisher, and he wrote this book, and it was about, I don't know, Appalachia, and he's a white author, and he writes about this black woman character in there, but the name is so wild. It's like Aquanisha or something, and the black girl's like, can we bring in a sensitivity reader on this, or a couple, because we need to go through. We can't publish this.
Totally. Yeah. There's going to be a lot less of that these days.
Yeah, and as I see more and more folks kind of like creep out, from the shadows in that vein of, yeah, I was saying these like feel really funny jokes you guys were into. Yeah, I'm actually terrible, and I support this guy in this way, and canceling doesn't exist. Look, I'm still here. It's wild, and it's just like, can we have a standard of like taste? Oh no, not at all.
No. But I mean, to be perfectly honest, those things have always been so hard. I don't know. It's really tricky, right? It's sort of like anyone who is offering a product, whether that product is art or some sort of consumer packaged good, is
Mhm.
going to that wants to do so for a mass audience, is going to give audiences what audiences want.
Yeah.
And so I'm always sort of stuck on this debate about whether or not is it the producer's fault or is it the consumer's fault? And like people, Like Cardi B talks about this in a way that's really interesting. She's like, listen, I make songs that are about emotional, heartfelt stuff.
Yeah.
Y'all don't listen to them, okay? It's the songs about, I don't know if I can swear on this thing, but it's
Please.
like there are songs about my wet ass pussy that go to number one, and songs about my broken little heart that y'all got no streams on. So I'm in this to make money.
Yeah.
And I will do what allows me to be successful. And so, apply that to comedians, apply that to commentators, apply that to content creators, apply that to Netflix and their 3,500 shows about murdered white girls. Like, is it really, whose fault is it? Honestly, like, right?
No, absolutely, absolutely. It goes back to sort of blaming, but the blaming the followers. It's like, but you followed this.
Yeah, y'all like this shit. Okay.
That's a good point.
I don't know. Like, don't look at Joe. Don't look at Joe Rogan. Like, y'all the ones 50 million views. Like, what are you talking about?
And it's always, I'm always curious as to those instances where, in that climate, well, this is the one we're actually going to be outraged on. Like, really? Why? Why is now suddenly we have this sort of outrage conscience? But this has been going on. This is sort of I guess this is sort of the what we're doing right now. This is what we accept. This is what is sort of rewarded, I guess, with followers of monetary gain.
It's also not new.
Yeah.
It's also not new. Listen to rock and roll, listen to jazz, listen to anything lyrical that has existed in the hit. Like there's been wildly problematic, like somebody did a study about how many times James Bond as a character across the franchise slaps women across the face. And it's like, it's not 4.
And he's a hero.
This is what I'm saying, right? Like John Wayne just slapping chicks across the face, like, calm down, like, swat, right?
Right.
Like this dynamic is not new. And so the one thing that has continued to endure is people's consumption of it.
Yeah. So as we move to the wrap up portion, I'm going to frame this. I'm going to make this a different question I normally would have asked. Usually people wrap up, you have any advice you want to share with the blah, blah, blah. And it's just like,
have I bounced myself out of consideration for giving good advice?
No. I think everything that you've said is good advice. I'm sitting here rethinking my process as a podcaster in this universe. But I'll frame it like this. What is the question that in these interviews that you wish you were asked? That's sort of the way I want to wrap it up there. Like with, some of the stuff that we've touched on, sort of, there's been some interesting takes here, which I really dig and I really value. I'm like, oh, she's inside of my head right now. But what would be that question, like with your background and your sort of knowledge around like television and making these projects that I think obviously they have a cultural representation. It broadens sort of conversations, I think, on race and gender. So what is the question that you want to be asked? Almost a softball to yourself.
First of all, Rob, how are you going to have me on your podcast and make me do the work? Okay. Second of all,
it's because I got to make it easy for myself. I'm just a lazy black man.
Right. Second of all, to be honest, I actually don't even, that's a deflection. Like, I just don't even know. It's weird. I don't know. It's like, I don't find myself all that interesting, right? Like I live with myself all the time. So none of this is new to me. None of these ramblings, none of these little mini rants. Like I'm just waddling around my kitchen, ranting about this stuff all day long anyway. So to me, I don't know it's all inside my head. So I can't really take an outsider's perspective, if you know what I mean. So sorry.
Then I'll give you the question that I was trying not to give you then. What would be that piece of advice, for someone going into exploring media, collaboration and sort of out for lack of better terms, I'll say helping present the stories that matter. What piece of advice would you share with someone that's interested and curious about that?
Yeah. I mean, if you can, I would do something else. It's such a bad industry. Film and TV is such a bad industry, especially right now. I just like give it a couple years,
Sure.
perfectly honest. Absent that, I would be very, if you like have to do it, fine. But I would be really focused on building up your own IP. Like, what is your podcast idea? What is like, you have all these free tools, right? There's so many things you can do for free that can turn into something. So it's like, go the Issa route and like make something for yourself and put it on Instagram or put it on YouTube or put it on Substack or put it on whatever the platform is for the modality that you're using, for the medium that you're using. Like make something for yourself, experiment, iterate, do as much as you can on your own with the homies. And then build up that IP catalog and have these ideas that you own, that you've already built a track record for, and then you can sell as like licensing or franchising or acquisitions versus these streamers always want to buy things in perpetuity, right? People want to buy the IP and then you don't have any say over where it goes, how it lives, what its future is, or make any money off of it after that. And so, go get your job, do what you need to do to pay your bills. But if you're thinking about making things, it's like, try your best to make things in a way that allows you to retain as much ownership over it as possible. And the best way to do that is to build a track record of it. So like actually publish something. And you have all these free online tools in order to do that, right?
That's really great advice. Thank you. I'm using that for myself, actually. Just
Great.
It's great, and I've heard that more and more, just different pieces of it, but not said in a sort of succinct way, the way that you put it. I've heard even this week it was an interview, I think, with the kid Miro, and he was just like, read your contracts, learn what the words in perpetuity.
Yeah.
And even in doing this, as I touched on a little bit earlier, sort of the prime thing that matters to me in doing this is the independent nature. Like I've had, opportunities to do this based in Baltimore. I've had folks just say, oh, you should just only do interviews in Baltimore. Why are you talking to people outside of there? And I was like, well, it's my vision. It's what I want to do. And I think that this person's interesting and so on. It's like almost explaining my interest and my taste. It's a very interesting thing, but not having to do that because I want to remain independent. So definitely aligning with that and building out this content in this sort of catalog and archive. So I want to move into the rapid fire questions. If you're, inclined to give me a few minutes of your time.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I got 3 questions. I've added 2. It was just one, and you were saying different things. I was like, all right, you got some more questions. All right. So here's the first one. It's going to be ridiculous. I remember back in the day when I was a kid, I wanted to be Bruce Leroy from The Last Dragon. Thinking back, was there a caricature or representation in media, maybe a movie, maybe a book or something that really resonated with you? You felt maybe seen like, oh, I like this person.
I insisted everyone in my family call me Tiger Lily for like a year, who's the Indian princess in Peter Pan.
Wow. Nice.
But she was the only brown character I'd ever seen. This is like pre-Tatiana. Like there was none of that when I was growing up. And so she was the only brown Disney figure at all.
Yeah.
Didn't matter to me that she was Native American and I am Black, but she's all I had. So so I used to make people call me Tiger Lily, and I would have my dad braid my hair into, because she has these long like pigtail braids.
Yeah.
I would have my dad, and obviously like Black hair doesn't lay like that in the same way. So like mine would like curl back up, but I was like constantly trying to pull them down so they'd hang like Tiger Lily. Terrible.
That's great. It's great.
Disney's the worst. I mean, it's great, but you know what I mean.
I found as a kid, it's like, yo, Bruce Leroy is a Black nerd. I'm here for it. And as I got a little bit older, I was like, nah, I kind of want to be like Show Enough. I kind of
sure.
I want to have shoulder pads on.
I was like, maybe I don't want to be a stereotypical, like non-verbal Indian princess. But what did I know then,
Yeah, it's a kid, it's a different time when you're a kid.
Time. It was the 80s. What do you want from me?
Uh, Same. Uh, so you mentioned cooking as a thing that you enjoy.
Mhm.
What's your dish? What is the dish that you're like? I make a pretty good, like I make a good crab cake.
Okay, I make a good crab cake. Don't make them very often. Um, I like everything. I make a great roast chicken. I make good fried chicken. I do a good curry. I do a good bolognese. I
Okay.
do a good yeah, I don't know. I can kind of cook
Okay, I'm
whatever.
a little jealous over here. You kind of just, say,
Can't
yeah, I make a
bake.
good crab cake, but also these things that you don't know how to make, Rob. I know you didn't say that.
I
Like,
can't bake. I don't bake, but I can cook.
yeah, I think cooking is like free jazz, where
100%.
baking is
100%.
chemistry.
Yeah, it's like, why are you bossing me around? Quit telling me what to do in my own house. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay, this is the last one, and I this is almost lifted directly out of a podcast I listened to you on. Uh, so I love a good rant, So what is your hottest take? Like I know that you enjoy a rant. You're a person that has a rant every now and again, right? So what's the rant that's like right there for you, maybe this week or today? I rant daily. I have a different rant per week, but I
Yeah,
rant daily.
sure. Got to keep it fresh, you know?
Yeah. It's like an RSS feed of rants. That's what these are is actually.
Absolutely. Uh, yeah, I have so many go-to rants. I'm so much fun at a dinner party, I'm sure you can imagine. I think people shouldn't watch reality TV. I think that people need to take boycotting television way more seriously. I think people need to understand that they live on an algorithm and everything that they watch. Like, do not hate watch anything.
Yeah.
If you hate watch anything, all you're doing is contributing to make sure there's more of that in the world. Don't watch things that don't support the culture or that don't support the version of the world you want to see. So don't watch Fuckboy Island. Don't watch the Kardashians. Don't watch um, Emily in Paris or whatever. Like, I get it. People want to escape. But the reality is you're creating demand for things. And if people don't understand that we, in the same way that we have historically had so much success from boycotting certain products and certain places and certain people, like, we need to apply that to our cultural products too. Otherwise, that's all we're going to get. Like, don't watch shows where girls are murdered in the first 5 minutes. Like, just don't do it. Turn it off. They're tracking all of that. And so people need to be, I think, a little bit more responsible if they care about the world. If you don't care about the world, fine, do whatever you want. But if you care about the world that we're creating, you need to take seriously all the stuff that you're consuming.
It's a really good point, and it sits there like when I back in the day before I just became somewhat aware of these different things on like social media. Why am I getting all of these weird fight videos and so on? It's just like, oh, because it's getting no response. That's why it's popping up in your algorithm, and they're using this and at the time a less refined way. But as it learns, it's going to be popping up more and more often. And I think sort of the barometer and being able to make your own stuff, that's fantastic and all of that. But I think of sort of those instances where I say this. Meanwhile, I'm floundering when I see like Tyler Perry post this thing of I've done this many treatments or this many scripts on a flight. And then I see people on social media, man, Beauty in Black is amazing. Like, is it? It's what? I don't know if it's all right, cool. Support Black. It's like, I guess, can we do something better? Nah,
Yeah.
this is a viral hit. It's like, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And the thing is, there's so much, people are making incredible stuff.
Yes.
There's so much dope shit in the world. There's so much dope art. There's so much dope like television and film and podcasts and all and writing and all of it. And it's just like, yeah, you might have to work a little bit harder for it, but like there is a reward to that. You will get like a dopamine hit from like finding something cool and watching it versus sort of passively absorbing whatever Netflix, the like dudes at Netflix think you want to watch, or the dudes at wherever. And, back it's like the modern version of digging through the crates for records, or like opening a CD and taking out the liner notes and like learning lyrics the old fashioned way, like all this stuff, like you might have to work a little bit harder for it, but it's there. People are making amazing, amazing stuff.
That's great. It's a great point. It's a great point to close on. So there's two things I want to do as we wrap up here. One, I want to thank you for coming on and spending some time with me.
My pleasure.
And two, I want to invite and encourage you to share in the final moments. This is the shameless plug. I think it's just, you should plug. You should plug the things, your social media, website, or anything that you want to share in these final moments. The floor is yours.
Oh, it's so funny. Did you know that I also do a podcast?
I might have seen
I have
that.
a political podcast called Twigg and Jenkins, which is my last name and my friend Brad's last name. We shared an office at the White House. And so we needed a place to put our ranting that wasn't just our FaceTimes. Like we shared an office 10 years ago. We've stayed really close. He's one of my closest friends. We always call each other when some political shit was going down, and we decided to inflict that on the masses. So we started a podcast called Twigg and Jenkins on YouTube and Spotify, and it's been really fun, but people should watch it. That's all I got.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Carri Twigg from Culture House for coming onto the podcast and sharing a bit of her journey and insights with us. And for Carri Twigg, I am Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.